So I recently bought a new lens. Big deal. I'm sure most of the channels you follow buy lenses weekly, it seems to me. But for me, I haven't bought a lens in 12 years. I'm serious. I don't buy lenses very often because when I buy a lens, it's for a very specific purpose, and I recommend you do the same. If you're a subscriber to this channel, you probably recently saw a short video I did on the unboxing of this lens. It's the Canon RF 85mm f2. This is not an uber expensive piece of glass, but it does perfectly serve the purpose that I wanted it for. I'm a professional portrait photographer. If you shoot portraits or you like to shoot portraits of friends and family occasionally and just want it to really look good, I'm doing this video because I think this lens is one to consider, especially if you don't have a reason to spend nearly $2,700 on the L version of something like this. This lens is surprisingly good. I was surprised by it when I tested it, so much so that I actually bought it. This video is not sponsored. Let's get into why I think this lens is worth looking at. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of this lens from my perspective as a portrait photographer. This lens does shine for portraits. Obviously, that's why I got it. But there's also the L version of this lens. Why didn't I, as a professional, buy the L version? Well, first off, it's $2,800. And is it worth it? Yeah, probably it is. Would it take a long time for me to justify that cost in my business? Yeah, it would. So is there that huge of a difference between that lens and this one? Well, I print my work. And I wouldn't have done this video. I waited to do this video until I had done at least a half a dozen sessions and made some large prints from the files. And let me tell you, this lens delivers the goods. This is a $600 lens versus a $2,800 lens. I have seen so many videos where people ignore products like this and only talk about the top of the line. And those are for financial reasons. I'm just going to be honest. There's a lot of financial reasons to talk about expensive products on YouTube channels, okay? But my primary job is not a YouTube channel. My primary job is a portrait studio. And anything I buy has to sing for its supper, so to speak. And I've got to find a way to have it pay for itself. Would the other lens pay for itself? Yeah, it would. It would take years. I'm going to be honest, it would take years. But this lens is really good. And I'm going to tell you, especially if you do not shoot a lot of portraits or people photography. Why spend $2,800 on something you're not going to use that often? I'm going to go into the pros and cons of why I made this purchase. Are there cons? Yes, there are cons. This is a $600 lens. Of course there are cons. But from what I use it for, why I pulled the trigger on this lens, I think you would be interested. I think you should have a look at it. Okay, let's start with the pros. First is the focal length. 85mm is a perfect focal length for me for portraits because it doesn't force you to be too far away or too close. If you want to do a full-length portrait, you can back away. And if you want to do a close-up, you can come in. You can do the same thing with 100, but you're going to be backing further away. And interaction with the portrait subject is really important. You don't want to be too far away. I think 85mm hits that sweet spot. The second pro of this lens is that it's an f2 lens, which is definitely fast enough for my work. Is the more expensive lens faster? Oh yeah, it's faster. Well, it better be for the price. But I never shoot wide open anyway. I mean, wide open shows all the flaws of any lens, and all the flaws of any lens are magnified greatly when you do large prints. So I almost never shoot wide open. I think the widest I've shot with this lens so far is 2.8, which that's very wide for me because the bokeh gets very soft. And when you do large prints, if you've seen some earlier videos, the background being too soft on a portrait subject with a large print has a really disorienting effect. Try it. It doesn't look the same in digital. I'm serious. So I typically shoot between 2.8 and 4. That's what I call wide or open. And this lens is perfect for that, which it gets it out of being wide open so you don't emphasize the flaws it does have. Hey, the other thing is this lens is image stabilized. For a $600 lens, that's a little unusual. Canon's doing some good things with their new RF lenses versus their EF lenses. And a lot of the portrait work I do is often handheld for portraits, especially I do a lot of high school seniors, and those are very fast sessions. So I've handheld this lens and the stabilization is pretty darn good. I have an EOS R, I don't have an R5, so I don't have in-body stabilization. And you know, with reasonable care and reasonable steadiness, this lens is good. The stabilization works great. Hey, another thing, this lens has macro. I had the EF version of this lens. Again, I talked about that in an earlier video. And that lens, the close focus distance was not good. You could not get close. This lens has macro capabilities. And 85mm, if you do any product or desktop work, it's a pretty sweet lens for product work and close-ups, things like that. That's a great bonus for a feature on this lens. The focus speed is reasonably fast. Of course, it's not as fast as the L lens or other L lenses I own, but again, I don't expect it to be. It's faster than I expected it would be, and that's a bonus. Again, doing portrait work, it's not typically run and gun where you really have to have ultra fast focus. I would say that if you're looking for this lens for sports, probably not. The focus probably won't be fast enough for you. But again, I'm giving this review from the perspective of portraits. One thing I was pleasantly surprised by is the color and contrast of the images that came out of this lens. Canon has obviously improved the optics from the EF version of this lens quite a bit. The EF version was pretty old, as I understand it. So it was sort of eye-opening to see how nice it was. I look at the images with this lens compared to my 24 to 105 f4 L lens. It stands up pretty good to them. That's an older lens. I don't have the RF version of that lens, but the RF version of this 85mm and the EF version of the 24-105, pretty good. Canon's come along. This lens is a lot better. And last but not least, the pros, as I already said, this is a $600 lens with all those features. In the Canon line, I've not seen a sub $1,000 lens that checks all those boxes. Canon seems to be separating their product line to the low and the high and not much in the middle. So we have to deal with what we get. As long as they raise the bottom like they're doing with this, I'm happy with it. This lens has, this lens has done the job for me, and I was a little worried. I'm like, can I really get away with a non-L lens for my work? Yeah, I can. Okay, of course there are some cons, right? It's a $600 lens, so yeah, there are some cons. The first con to this lens, as I mentioned somewhat earlier, I alluded to, the focus isn't brilliantly fast. It's very fast, surprisingly fast and quiet. However, it does occasionally miss focus. I'm new to using the lens. I may not be quite using it properly, but I can't say I'm surprised that it would occasionally miss focus and I have to touch the screen and say, nope, look at this person. It's a $600 lens. It occasionally misses focus. That's why I said earlier, not for an action photographer, in my opinion. It's also not weather sealed. In my work, I don't usually work in any kind of weather at all. I don't really shoot weddings. If I did shoot weddings, this probably would be an issue because with a wedding, you got to shoot whatever nature gives you. In a portrait session, client will often reschedule and say, nah, I really don't want to get wet and not look good. Imagine that. They don't want to not look good. But it's not weather sealed. So, and that's a big deal. That's a big part of why L lenses are as special as they are. Now this one's kind of annoying, and I've heard some channels who say things like the Canon cripple hammer. That's one case for this. This lens does not come with this. I find that rather annoying. I had to buy this extra. Okay, this can't cost a lot, the lens hood I'm talking about. This can't cost a lot for Canon to make a lens hood come with this lens. I just don't think they would. I don't know why they feel they needed to do that. You could tack a few bucks on to the lens. It's already a great price. Why not include the hood? That's a con, and as a professional, I find that annoying. A lens without a lens hood, for me, I don't like flare unless I put it in myself. So that's a con for me. Okay, so from my list, you can see that there are more pros than cons for me. For portrait work, I emphasize that strongly. My list does not apply to other genres of photography. For instance, it doesn't apply to videography. I would not evaluate this lens. I don't feel I'm qualified to evaluate this lens for a videographer. I don't feel I'm qualified to evaluate this lens necessarily for a landscape photographer or sports photographer, although I'm pretty certain that sports and action photographers aren't going to want this lens for the major con of the focus. It's a very inexpensive lens. Sports and action is very demanding. That's one of those cases where usually you are going to need the L lens. I have another video I shot of some budget Canon lenses for portrait purposes where I previewed this lens. The important conclusion I hope you can draw from this is that even as a professional, you don't always have to have the most expensive gear. It's one of my biggest points of contention from my peers. There is very little bad equipment today. I started a long time ago, and let me tell you, we have an embarrassment of riches in today's world of photography. Don't be fooled into thinking you have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get a good piece of kit. You do not. I hope this has helped you. I hope this is giving you good information for your photography. And until the next video, cheers.